Okay, Bismillah. Let me know if you can hear me now. Anyone hear me online? Is it still? Okay, perfect. Alhamdulillah. And if you're ever in San Francisco, go to this place. It's a halal chicken and waffles place. Pretty good. All right. So, Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن والاه وبعد. Yeah, mashallah. This is Tlayba Foundation. They do good work. And it's one of the organizations that I like the work they're doing and happy to support. Today we're going to go on to lesson 5 of key books and figures of the Hanbali school. And this is where we're going to be taking ourselves towards kind of closer to the modern period. And again, this is the list of what we're doing. So I might just add for the next couple of lectures, I might add the books on Usul and Qawaid after this. I might not. I might add them at the end. I'm not sure. We'll see. I'm starting to think that some of the things about fatwa here at the end aren't going to be too important to the general audience, but we'll see, inshallah ta'ala. So where do we want to go from here? We want to go and start talking about kind of after Ibn Qudama, after Taymiyyah, we start having the students of Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn Muflih, and others. We started talking about Al-Mardawi yesterday. Kind of taking everything that's been written on the madhab and really congealing it into major texts. And so this one is called the Tanqih al-Mushbi' ala al-Muqni'. And there is a typo in the... SubhanAllah, I've written these slides like a year ago, 2 years ago, and never noticed that I made a typo in the title. Regardless, التنقيح المشبع على تنقيح المشبع على المقنع by al-Mardawi, who died in 885. We talked about him last time. Here he took the Muqni' and he used all of the review and the correction of all the major books that he reviewed before. Al-Furu', Tasih al-Furu', Al-Insaf, all these books. And he attempted to codify this into the text of Al-Muqni'. So essentially say, okay, here are all of these regulations and rules and conditions and issues that weren't in there. Let's add them to Al-Muqni'. And so this is a very important book in that it's the shorthand for all of the works that came before that. Okay. The next is in 968, we have Musa ibn Ahmad ibn Musa al-Hajjawi al-Maqdisi al-Salihi. He was a Hanbali jurist from Damascus. He was the Mufti of the Hanabila and the Shaykh al-Islam of Damascus. His lineage goes back to Hajjah, which is one of the villages of Nablus. He was born in the year 895 in the village of there in Nablus, where he was raised, recited the Quran. He started studying the different ulum, and then he completely turned himself towards fiqh. He then traveled to Damascus. He settled in the school of Abu Umar, famous school of the Hanabila, read on the sheikhs of his era, and then accompanied the scholar Ash-Shihab Ash-Shuwaiki. Now let me move that over there. Now he says about his work here in the text. He says, I endeavored to edit his quotations and summarize them to avoid lengthening them, often abstracting them from their evidence and rationale based on a single opinion which is what was deemed most correct by those skilled in weighing such matters, including the scholar Al-Qadi ala ad-Din, meaning Al-Mardawi, in his books Al-Insaf and Tasheeh al-Furu' and Al-Tanqih. Occasionally, I mention some differing opinions due to their strength, and sometimes attributed a ruling to its proponent to avoid being responsible for it. And sometimes I stated the disagreement due to the absence of a corrector. And by the Shaykh, when Al-Hajjawi, he says Al-Shaykh, I mean Shaykh al-Islam, Bahrul Ulum, the ocean of knowledge, Abu al-Abbas, Ahmad ibn Taymiyyah. So again, we see this constant respect and use of Ibn Taymiyyah, the grandson, in the books of the Hanabila, and that is even the later books of the Hanabila. So there's this kind of movement nowadays that tries to make light of his legacy, or that he somehow was not a real Hanbali, or that he didn't have a real important position in the madhab. And what I found is that the people who do that are usually one of two people. They are those who really don't have much knowledge of fiqh at all. And so you'll find them like, pseudo academics saying things like, oh, this dangerous opinion was expressed by Ibn Taymiyyah. And then you find out it's the normative position of all form of that. Or there are people who have an issue with his taqrirat aqadiyya, his aqidah stances, and therefore want to diminish his position in the madhab. Okay, so Al-Iqna' is a very important book. Now, here we have Al-Futuhi in his book Muntaha al-Iradat. He was known as Ibn Najjar. He was an Egyptian Hanbali jurist and judge. So this book, and he died in 972. In this book, he basically takes al-Muqni', al-Tanqih, and other issues, and he puts them all together. Okay? It's considered the mainstay of most later scholars. So it and its hawashi are very important for research and fatwa. So the cover that's mentioned here, this is from Sheikh Mansour ibn Yunus al-Buhuti, okay, who died in 1051. His sharh has become one of the most trusted explanations for Muntaha al-Iradat. So sharh Muntaha al-Iradat, right? They used to say, Ya man yarumu بفقهه يا من يروم بفقهه نيل أعلى المراتب اقرأ لشرح المنتهى واحفظ دليل الطالب. So there's these little, kind of poetic aphorisms that the Hanabila have. They say, whoever is seeking the highest form of fiqh, then and the highest of stations should read Sharh al-Muntaha and memorize Dalil al-Talib. Okay, so Ibn Najjar, he comes and he takes these books that came before him and he summarizes them into this one book. Now, another very important book that is based on Muntaha al-Iradat is by Mar'i ibn Yusuf ibn Abi Bakr ibn Ahmed al-Karmi al-Maqdisi al-Hanbali. He was a historian, he was a man of letters, he was a prominent jurist. He was born in Tul Karam in Palestine. He moved to Jerusalem and then to Cairo, where he passed away. So al-Karmi, Sheikh Mar'i, rahmatullahi alayh, he used the text of al-Muntaha and he basically turned it into a summary. So remember, notice that this is a norm. We have al-Khiraqi. He takes, Jami' al-Riwayat and all these books that came before him, turns it into a mukhtasar. Excuse me. We have al-Hajjawi. He turns the books, takes from before him, turns it into a mukhtasar. We have al-Mardawi. He goes over all these books does tasheeh of them, turns it into a mukhtasar, tanqih al-mushbi'. Now, Sheikh Mar'i also wrote another book, another text called Ghayat al-Muntaha, which we will see in a moment. So, Dalil al-Talib is a very good text in that of the texts of the Hanabila, it is very clear in the way that it is laid out. So if you were to like have to choose between Zad al-Mustaqni' and Dalil al-Talib ashal في التناول. It's easier to get, basically. It's easier for you to read and kind of get things without really having to like tweak your mind in order to understand, oh, this lamir goes here and this lamir goes there. Now, there are two general kind of approaches to writing and access to knowledge. And I think it's very important for everyone to remember, and actually to take this as a very important, lesson, that quite frankly, we are just trying to get this correct. Quite frankly, we have access to Islamic literacy and to texts that is unprecedented. And when reading these texts, you're going to find two approaches. And one of my teachers, used to say this is like, madhab al-ta'qid and madhab al-tasheel. You had some scholars who made the text difficult to place a challenge on the student and weed out students who were not serious. And then some scholars who took this ta'qid a little too far, they actually did it so that they could control access to the knowledge. This is very common in usul al-fiqh. So you have scholars of usul al-fiqh who wrote in very tight, very sometimes convoluted, very difficult syntax and wordings in order to make the science inaccessible, in order to monopolize it. You have others who wrote with a sense of challenge, that I want to challenge students to be able to get this, so that not everyone can just jump in and say that, they got it. The other approach in both fiqh and usul is the approach of general understanding, right? That they sufficed with not having to make things difficult, to make it generally understanding, but yet still intricate and deep. So the idea here is not the Taysir movement that came, say, like in the 50s. The Taysir movement in Islamic text in the 50s tried to make classical knowledge easy, but it actually made it shallow. Whereas these scholars wanted to make it essentially clear but robust. And I believe that Dalil al-Talib is one of those books that is clear and robust. So if you read it and you don't read any of the adillah, you don't read any of the ta'lilat, you don't read the sharh, you're going to get you're going to, just from knowing Arabic well, you're going to get a number of issues off the bat. It's not going to be something that's hard and seems inaccessible. Yeah. MashaAllah. Abu Salihat, he commented here. After getting used to the layout of Dalil al-Talib, trying to dig into a Zad became very difficult. So I was actually the opposite. I studied a Zad first, Sheikh Ahmed Rashid al-Ruhaili, and it served a great purpose in that it was so compact that we were able to get a lot done. And I benefited from that greatly because I was studying Zad al-Mustaqni' with him, and I had started Kuliya. In Kuliya, we were doing comparative fiqh. So I would many times study the madhab and then go into the Kuliya and then study the comparative fiqh, and it helped me have a basis. And it sometimes had to study the comparative fiqh first and then go back and study the madhab. And I had a deeper appreciation for the scholars of the madhab because of how easy they had made it by making short, accessible texts, even if they were difficult, like a Zad. But yeah, later on I did Dalil Talib with Sheikh Abdullah Zahim, and I appreciated the text more, because I think one thing that gets translated poor. Okay, let's see if this is working now. Working? Looks like it's working. Okay. Great. All right. Confirm for me if it's working, guys. Let me know if you can hear me. All right, great. Yeah, not sure what happened. Abu Salihat, what's the last thing that you said? You said last thing that I heard was I appreciated how when referring to a dalil. Okay. I appreciated how when referring to a dalil. Man, not even sure now. I was saying how that Okay. All right. Sound back on? Yeah, is this sound back on? Yep. Check it. Is this sound back on? Back on. Great. Okay. I was saying, alhamdulillah, would it be You know, our predecessors, you know, I remember Sheikh Muhammad and Muhammad Mukhtar saying like his father used to have to like study but bass boosted. Sorry, I'm not sure what I can do about that. If this gets too frustrating, I'm just gonna stop. Um, I don't think that there's any. I don't think that there's any other way to do this. Okay. Okay, now what about now? All right. It looks like I'm gonna have to check out what's the issue with the mic later. Let me just make sure it's working in here. Bass boosted. Okay. All right. So I think last thing that I was saying about what I appreciate about Dalil al-Talib is the clarity but robustness of the text. So it is not overly difficult. And I think one thing that gets, when people try to take difficult texts and translate them into English, they many times aren't translating the meanings, they're translating the difficulty. And you're impressing upon students that they can't learn because they're trying to get over two difficulties at once. Difficulty of the language and then the difficulty in that language, or in the syntax and the context that it's used in. That's a problem in and of itself. And so I think that it's very important to use texts that are it's very important to use texts that are easy. And my teachers that I studied with, for the most part, preferred this second style of concise, or shall I say, clear yet robust, not the Taysir movement of like the 50s and afterwards, or like say the 60s and 70s. And that's one of the reasons why I don't like teaching anvam or poetry, like taking poetry. And al-ha'iyya, the only reason I really translated al-ha'iyya and even though it's a poem, is because it's from one of the Salaf. So it's from Ibn Abi Dawud. And he's saying, this is what I heard from myself, or this is what I believe and what I heard from my father and Ahmed ibn Hanbal and all the scholars of hadith that came before me. So there's a importance in it. I also think that, like in Anvam, it's useful when you are remembering rules of thumb. Like, for example, Alfiyat ibn Malik has tons of them. فعال أو مفعال أو فعيل عن كثرة في فاعل بديل. If I say فعال or mif'al or fa'il, I'm talking about profuseness or quantity when using it as a replacement for fa'il. So if I said a man is taliq and I wanted to say that he does talaq a lot, I would not say huwa taliqun kathir, taliqun jiddan. No, I would say huwa mitlaqun. As it's mentioned in the Athar, كان الحسن رضي الله عنه مطلاقا للنساء. Al-Hasan would divorce women frequently. He married and divorced frequently. I think it said that he married and divorced over 100 women. Radiallahu anhu. And he said that he never divorced a woman except that she was happy with having been his wife and did not remarry, so that she would become his wife in Jannah. That's what they say in his biography. Or you could say talaq, right? Darib, a person is darib. He hits. Darrab, he's abusive, or he hits a lot. You could say anyway. That's a number of rules of thumb that are found in Anvam. I'm not a big fan of translating them into English unless there is some kind of classical import for this, like this one, because I have an isnad in the book, and because it's from I studied it directly with my teachers, and because it has, this early, weight. Abu Bakr ibn Abi Dawood, he died 316, right? Otherwise, I think you just go straight to the topic. You study the topic, you understand the topic, khalas, imshi. That's it. So many of my teachers did not have this thing of like picking apart and twisting and get out the wrench and get out the screwdriver and go into all of this. إذا فهمت المراد يكفي. Sheikh Ahmed ibn Abdul Wahhab al-Shinqiti, who I studied usul with, was like this. Sheikh Tarahib al-Dosari was as well. Hafidhahumullah ta'ala. Actually, no, Sheikh Ahmed passed away, Allah yarhamhum. But anyway. Okay. So, Dalil al-Talib is a very important book, inshallah ta'ala. It's the one that I'm going to base my public classes on. And I was actually talking with one of my students today, and I'm thinking the way that we're going to do this is we're going to study the text. We're going to take, for example, all of Kitab al-Tahara, and we're going to study it from the beginning to the end, and we're going to analyze it, and the recordings will go up. You'll have time to go over those recordings and review everything, and then we will have designated Q&A sessions for analysis and questions. I'll ask you questions, you'll ask me questions, and then that way I can gauge who's actually following along, who's actually learning from it, right? Instead of just kind of throwing it out there and really not knowing what the effect was. I'll probably do it very similar to how I did Kitab al-Wasaya with Zidni when I was out in Sacramento, and that is also add the analysis of Ilal al-Ahkam and the Adillah. الدليل والتعليل, as they say. Okay, so Dalil al-Talib. So we mentioned al-Buhuti earlier, Mansur bin Yunus bin Salah ad-Din al-Buhuti. He was the Sheikh of the Hanabila of Egypt, and one of the last of their scholars there. So al-Buhut is a village in Egypt. I don't know how to even pronounce that governorate properly, as it's not written in Arabic, but it's found in that governance, the Ali, I think, something like that. Yeah, so there's a mistake here in this slide, and I knew it because I had 2 copies of these slides open, and so this text here should have been removed, where it's talking about Ibn Qudama, and it should be talking about al-Buhuti. So I'll go back and change that, inshallah ta'ala. So I opened up the wrong slides to present to you. Regardless, so what al-Buhuti did is he took Zal al-Mustaqni', okay, and then he picked apart the phrases, and he put words in between to basically re-expand it. So it was a muqni', it was expanded, it was compressed. He then took it and then he re-expanded it, and then he would mention the dalil and the ta'lil. He would mention the textual evidences and the rational evidences for that, right? So and then he would mention additional issues that weren't mentioned in the beginning. Now they say that Zal al-Mustaqni' contains over 6,000 different fiqh issues. And that's by reading the text mantuqan wa mafhuman. That's by reading the black letter of the law, okay? Right, reading what the words that are said and then the implications of what those words mean. So you get like 6,000 different issues of fiqh out of there. Now, one of the reasons why Zad al-Mustaqna and Rawd al-Murbi' became so famous is because al-Buhuti and his explanations. And so, if you're going to go and study, I would study a Rawd al-Murbi' directly, and you won't have to have like the picking apart of the phrases. One of our teachers who didn't like it very much, he used to call it a Rawd al-Mur'id, the scary garden, and he used to say that it was better for people to just focus on a basic book, a book like Umdat al-Fiqh, and then reading something like Sunan Abi Dawud. But the scholars of the madhab, when they speak about Zad al-Mustaqna', they'll say Matnu Zadin wa Bulugh Kafiyani fi Nubugh, that the text of a Zad and the text of Bulugh al-Maram are sufficient for a person's ascendancy. So if a person wants to reach a high level of fiqh in the madhab, then they can read Zad al-Mustaqna' and Bulugh al-Maram. Now, there's an issue here of memorization. There's an undue insistence sometimes on memorizing things, memorizing texts, and there are essentially two positions. Okay, so there's two things that you need to you need to realize when studying. There are some scholars who wanted you to memorize everything, then seek the explanation. And others who said you just need to read it and familiarize yourself with it enough that you essentially develop what they call hifz al-mavan. You have a nascent memorization of all of the areas of the issues. But you do not need to, as some scholars would say, لابد أن تحفظ الزاد كما تحفظ الفاتحة. You have to study, you have to memorize a Zad like you memorize the Fatiha. I think that this is mubalagha, and I found most of my teachers as well saying the same thing. Sheikh Muhammad ibn Muhammad al-Mukhtar used to say, لا يحفظ إلا الوحيين. The only thing that's memorized is the two revelations, the Quran and the Sunnah. Everything else, you study it, you review it, it becomes second nature, but you don't have to read it like al-Fatiha. Okay. Abu Salihat says, so you'd suggest studying a Rawd over starting with a Zad? Absolutely, because it's a Zad made easy, basically. It's a Zad where it becomes easy for you to understand what the author wanted. Unless you want to kind of subject yourself to that idea of like picking it apart, but I don't really see a need for that. Now, another book of al-Buhuti's, which is really important, is Kashaf al-Qina' an Matn al-Iqna'. So we mentioned before Matn al-Iqna' by al-Hajjawi, and al-Buhuti wrote a explanation of it called Kashaf al-Qina' an Matn al-Iqna', the removing of veils from the text of al-Iqna'. So it is one of the full explanations of the text, and it's also a core book for anyone who works in the areas of qada and fatwa. In fact, every single qadi in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has this book in his office. This was the core text for qudat at one time, and still is. Another important book is Hashiyat bin Gayed. Yes, some people can say Hashiyat ibn Qa'id, but in his own, and this is another thing about Arabic. Arabic is not like the convoluted modern standard Arabic that everybody thinks is the only Fusha, but he was popularly known as bin Gayed. Ibn Gayed, right? Uthman ibn Ahmed ibn Sa'id ibn Uthman ibn Qa'id al-Najdi. He was a jurist. He was from the distinguished people of Najd. He was born in the city of Al-Uyayna, and he traveled to Damascus, where he learned from its scholars. He then moved to Cairo, where he passed away. He wrote a marginalia on Muntaha al-Iradat, where he mentions many of the prevalent issues of his time, and his opinions were considered authoritative by the Hanabila of his time. So he died in 1097. So his Hashia is very, very important. And if you'll notice something, and you might say, well, a lot of these books are like super repetitive, like they're the same book, but they have different explanations. Essentially, what you're doing is you're finding, the scholars of every epoch adding on and kind of creating critical mass with opinions. And this allows you to trace the way that the scholars dealt with issues. So, for example, if somebody came and said, and this is a debate a while back about smoking in the Hanbali madhab, people trying to claim that it's not haram. Well, because some scholars, when they commented it on their in their hawashi, they didn't say that it was haram. They didn't say that because in the what's the word that I'm looking for? In the sequence of dealing with issues, legal issues, you essentially have the issue become popular or asked about through fatwa. Muftis will start to write letters to fuqaha and qudat asking if they have opined on it or if they have any information about it. Many times scholars will then gather that into a small treatise. That treatise will then be incorporated into a larger work of fiqh during that time. Other scholars will concur, and then they will say this will become the madhab as it was accepted by most of the scholars of that time. We saw that when we read Al-Hafiz ibn Hajar's At-Tahniya bil-A'yad. Myself and Abu Yahya, when we read that together, you can go and check the video out. The Shafi'i madhab was silent for the most part. Ibn Hajar said, okay, I want to go through everything that's been said and see how this becomes, how is this thought about in the Shafi'i madhab, and then now his opinion in that treatise is referenced as the official madhab opinion. So the benefit of something like Hashid bin Gaid is that he mentions these things. And there is someone who took the Hawashi of Ahl-Najd and kind of all of these smaller Hawashi on Muntaha and gathered them, all together in one book, which I still haven't gotten, but I hear that it's really very beneficial. Okay, the next book is an explanation of Dalil al-Talib, and it's by Abdul Qadir ibn Umar ibn Taghlab. It's called Nail al-Ma'arib, Sharh Dalil al-Talib. So Ibn Taghlab was one of the Damascene scholars, the scholars of Damascus, and he basically took from Sharh al-Muntaha and from al-Iqna', and he wrote this Sharh of Dalil al-Talib. And so it is a very clear and very beneficial sharh of Dalil al-Talib. I like it a lot. Next we have Mukhtasar al-Insaf huwa al-Sharh al-Kabir by Sheikh Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. Died in the year 1206. So if you notice, we have 1135, Ibn Taghlab. We have Ibn Gayyad at 1097. We have Ibn Abdul Wahhab at 1206. He was born in the city of Uyayna, where Ibn Gayyad was from. He studied with his fathers and his uncles. He traveled to the Hijaz. He studied with Abdullah al-Majma'i and Muhammad Hayat al-Sindi in Medina. He visited Sham. He entered al-Basra, and that's where he acquired the books of Ibn Rajab. It said that Kalimat al-Ikhlas by Ibn Rajab was his motivation for writing Kitab al-Tawheed. He then returned to Najd, settled in Huraymila, and then after that Al-Uyayna, where his father was a judge. In his fiqh opinions, he leaned towards Al-Iqna' and Al-Buhuti's opinions. Right? I'm sorry, Al-Iqna', where he leaned towards Al-Hajjawi, where his father and his others lead towards the Taqrirat of Al-Buhuti. Now, what's interesting about the Hanabila of Saudi Arabia is that they generally were connected to the Hanabila of other areas through trade and travel. And so you will find some of them in Qasim who are very close to Levantine Hanabila. And you will find others who are in Najd closer to Egyptian Hanabila. Why? Because the Najdis would come from Najd down to Hajj, meet with the Hanabila that were coming from Egypt, as they would come more frequently due to the very deep ties between Egypt, Mecca, Jeddah, and Ta'if. Whereas Al-Qasim is farther north, and therefore it was easier to get to the areas of the Levant, right? So this represents one of the essentializations of Hanbali knowledge at that time, and it was used in fatwa during the time of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. Now, the next book here is called Matalib ul Nuha by Ar-Ruhaybani, along with Minhat Mawla al-Fath of al-Shatti. And this is, let's see, an explanation of Ghayat al-Muntaha. Bismillah. Remember we said the author of Dalil al-Talib was Mar'i bin Yusuf al-Karmi. And Mar'i, he went and he took Al-Iqna' by Al-Hajjawi and Muntaha al-Iradat by Al-Futuhi, and he combined them into one matan, which he called Ghayat al-Muntaha fi al-Jam'i bayn al-Iqna' wal-Muntaha. So Ar-Ruhaybani, he essentially, Ar-Ruhaybani, what he tried to do, okay, is he tried to take everything written at his time. Okay, he literally does induction of the Hanabila everywhere, and he tries to combine the present explanations, any additional points that you find in these hawashi, he mentions them in his book. Issues that are undecided, he mentions that they were undecided. He points to previous and contemporary scholarship across the Hanbali realm, from Egypt and Syria and the Hijaz, and yes, even Najd. So he references Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, he references many of the scholars of Najd at that time, because they had opined in the madhab on certain issues. And so there was, it was very much a kind of global look at Hanbali scholarship of that time. And he'll even said, Kataba fulanun risalatan fi kada, so-and-so wrote a treatise on this, but I haven't found it yet. Or he mentioned XYZ in it, right? So he'll even say, for example, that this is the fatwa, or this is the inclination, هذا هو الاحتمال في مذهبنا, this is the inclination in our madhab, and although the Malikis, they give this fatwa, right? And we're closer to that. And the Hanafis say this, and he'll mention the other madhahib. So this is actually, Matalib ul Nuha is another one of my favorite books. Like, so if I'm researching something and I want to go back to two books that I know I'm going to find an indication about, I go back to Matalib ul Nuha and I go back to Al-Furu'. Those are the first books that I go to. Then after that, I'll go to, if I need like evidences and ta'dilat, I'll go to like Sharh al-Kabir and Sharh al-Muntaha, right? Another important hashia is the hashia of Sheikh Abdullah Babatin. He was Abdullah ibn Abdurrahman ibn Abdulaziz al-Babatin. He's known by his surname, so Ibn Babatin. He was born in Rodat Sudair. Rodat Sudair is a kind of agricultural region outside of Najd. So if you have Najd on the Mesa, Rodat Sudair is just kind of down, just a little bit from there. It's considered in the modern period, it's part of the Riyadh region. He died in 1282 in Unayza. Unayza is a famous city in Qasim, that where Sheikh Abdul Rahman ibn Sa'di was, and Sheikh Muhammad bin Salih al-Uthaymeen was, where he was serving as a judge most of his life. Unayza is also known for the famous scholar of Qira'at, Ibn al-Jazari, living there for some time, and that's where he started to write a number of his books on Qira'at. As he was on his way to Hajj, and he was kidnapped by highway robbers, and then he escaped. And when he escaped, he made it to Unayza, and he lived there for a number of years. I believe it was Tayyibat al-Nashr that he started writing while he was in Unayza. Anyways, Hashiyat Bab al-Taym, because he was a qadi, and so he had this hands-on knowledge of deciding things between people and dealing with the issues of the day, because people are coming to court with active disputes, there's a lot of benefit in this book. Okay, next is the Manhaj al-Salikin of Sheikh Abdul Rahman ibn Sa'di, who died in 1376. He also has a Hashiyah on Al-Muntaha. So Sheikh Abdul Rahman ibn Nasr al-Sa'di, he was born in the town of Unayza. His mother passed away when he was 4 years old. His father died when he was 7. That left him an orphan. But he was raised well by the remainder of his family, and he was known to be very intelligent and had a strong desire to learn from a very early age. He studied with Sheikh Muhammad bin Mani', who has a ta'liq on Dalil al-Talib, Sheikh Muhammad ibn Abdul Latif al-Sheikh, and Sheikh Muhammad al-Amin al-Shinqiti, the author of Adwa al-Bayan. Sheikh Abdul Rahman ibn Sa'di was known as a prolific writer. All of his writings have been printed and are in print. And I have been working on a number of the smaller texts that he wrote as teaching tools, which inshallah ta'ala there will be an announcement for soon. Some of you might have seen my classes in Risalatun Latifatun fi Usul al-Fiqh, a subtle treatise on Usul al-Fiqh that I taught earlier at Ibrahim Center here in Houston. That was maybe 10 years ago, subhanAllah. But those are up on YouTube. But I'm taking that and another text on Qawaid Fiqhiyya, and another text on Akhlaq, and another text on Aqaid, and putting them all together. So why is Manhaj al-Salikin important? So some people think that Manhaj al-Salikin is somehow not a real Hanbali text. They'll say, is this from the Hanbali books? And yes, it's from Min Samim Kutub al-Hanabila. And anyone who's read the books of the madhab knows that Manhaj al-Salikin is a very exceptional instructional text. So the Shaykh essentially, he took Umdat al-Fiqh and he added to it the taqrirat and the knowledge that he had, because the Shaykh had memorized Dalil al-Talib. He added to it the knowledge that he had from Dalil al-Talib, but with the same easy kind of easy breezy style of Umdat al-Fiqh. And at times he would he would in his book kind of avoid issues that were not acted on but were typical of Hanbalis to mention. And so, like all of the difficulties that you find in Bab al-Miyah amongst the Hanabila, it just completely avoids them, because they weren't practical, and therefore he would leave them for something like Dalil al-Talib. People have this misnomer that Manhaj al-Salikin was written as like ala al-fiqh al-rajih, the rajih fiqh. And the question always for the rajih fiqh guys is, rajih according to who? As everyone needs a scholarly rubric to be able to conclude that something is a more preponderant opinion or not. And therefore, anyone who's writing in fiqh is going to be doing so according to the methodologies and the information and the schools available to him at his time. Right? So if you want to study fiqh, actually study fiqh. You can study it with known texts in these schools. So Manhaj al-Salikin, some scholars would use Manhaj al-Salikin, and then they would read Manar al-Sabir, and then they would read Al-Kafi, and then they would read Al-Sharh al-Kabir. That was one يعني إحدى طرق التفقه. So that was one of the ways that they would essentially bring people up through studying. So Sheikh al-Sa'di bin Sa'di rahimahullah ta'ala was really gifted with writing convincingly and clearly with a deep spiritual bent. And so like his book Al-Asbab al-Mufida lil-Hayat al-Sa'ida, the beneficial means for a happy life, I think is one of the best self-help books that anyone could ever read. It's phenomenal. If you can find a very good translation of it, it's a very good book. In general, all of his books are immensely beneficial, and I highly recommend anyone who's learning to read them and learn from them, because not only does he have a very clear, direct tone, but it is an uncomplicated language. It's not a simplistic language, but it's uncomplicated. It's clear and robust. Okay, next is the Fatawa of Muhammad ibn Ibrahim. Muhammad ibn Ibrahim ibn Abdul Latif al-Sheikh. So when you hear al-Sheikh from Saudi Arabia, that means they are from the family of Sheikh Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. So he was the very first mufti of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. He was born and he died in Riyadh. And he was educated there. He lost his sight at the age of 11. He continued his studies until he completed the memorization of the Quran. He studied many books and texts. He began to teach, and then he was appointed Mufti of the kingdom and then its Chief Justice. He was then made the very first president of the Islamic University of Medina, which people don't know this. The Islamic University of Medina actually started as an idea amongst a group of business people in Medina who had land and money, and they were seeing people coming from all over the world coming to the Masjid al-Nabawi trying to study, but maybe they didn't have the Arabic, maybe they didn't have the access, maybe they couldn't stay for long. So they actually kind of kick-started this idea, and this was brought, raised to the attention of Sheikh Muhammad ibn Ibrahim and others until it became a project that was sponsored. And then this project became a project that was kind of taken to the Muslim World League as well. The Sheikh is the founding council of the Muslim World League, where you now have, Islamic universities that were established in many other countries. So you have Islamic University of Malaysia, you have Islamic University in Faisalabad, you have the Islamic University in Kenya. You have a number of different Islamic universities. Right? He was the president of girls' education in the kingdom, and he established the Saudi Public Library in Riyadh, and he gathered about 15,000 printed books and 117 manuscripts to help establish that public library. So this collection, why is this collection important? Even though it is a book of fatwa and individual treatises, because it represents legal opinions on contemporary issues according to the madhab after the time of a Ruhaybani. So if we look at a Ruhaybani as kind of collecting everything up to his time, then what we find with the fatwa of Muhammad ibn Ibrahim is that people were sending him questions, and he was a very staunch Hanbali. So he was answering according to the madhab. So you can have a lot of confidence in the way that he's answering things, and he'll even reference back to the books of the madhab. So that's the benefit from his Rasail, Fatawa wa Rasail. Salihat asking, I have seen some advocate for learning fiqh from books of Ahadith al-Ahkam like Umdat al-Ahkam. Is this an approach that you see any benefit in? Each style has its benefits, but the books of Ahadith al-Ahkam are missing a number of components that are found in the books of fiqh. They're missing definitions, ta'rifat. They're missing taqasim al-anwa', types and categories. They're missing ta'lil. They're missing the rational proofs that are derived from the textual proofs. They're missing the lists of furud and wajibat and sunan, and they're missing the sifat or the awsaf of that kind of gather together everything that was said so that you can visualize the ruling. So you think of the books of fiqh, these are books of like a concordance of everything that you're going to find in the Quran and in the Sunnah and in the Athar of the Salaf and in their ta'lilat, right? Whereas if you're only reading Ahadith al-Ahkam, you have to read so much more and come to those conclusions on your own. Many times you can falter in that. So each have their place, but they're used for different purposes. Fiqh is to give this comprehensive look at all of the ahkam. Books of ahkam, ahadith al-ahkam, are for two things. They're to determine the relative status of the hadith that are being used as evidence for the books of fiqh, okay, and to give the reader a broad exposure to what was mentioned on the topic. Did the Islamic universities in different regions of the world help spread the Hanbali madhab specifically? No. They each teach the madhab of their own areas. So, for example, in Malaysia, the Shafi'i madhab is prominent. In Pakistan, the Hanafi madhab is prominent. So, no, the idea of the Islamic University was not limited to the Hanbali school. The idea of the Islamic University of Medina in specific was that you had already studied a madhab in your country, and then you come to do further studies in comparative fiqh and usul and things like that. So the idea was not to make everybody a Hanbali. In fact, I mean, most of my classmates while we were there were not in any way, shape, or form informed by or had studied the madhab of the Hanabila. Okay, next is Sharh al-Mumta' by Ibn Uthaymeen. Sharh al-Mumta', and this is not to be confused with al-Mumta' by Tanuhi ibn al-Munajjah, who was a contemporary of Majd al-Din, but Sharh al-Mumta' by Ibn Uthaymeen, who, alhamdulillah, I had the blessing to study with directly in Unayza and to ask him questions. He passed away in 2001, so I was able to study with him the year before he died. He was a student of Abdurrahman ibn Sa'di, and Abdurrahman ibn Sa'di, when he went to him to study with him, he saw that he was not ready. He told him, go and study with Sheikh Abdullah ibn Aqil, who was his main student at that time. Sheikh Abdullah ibn Aqil is the kind of engineer of the Saudi judicial system. Muhammad ibn Ibrahim was one of its first chief justices, but Ibn Aqil kind of set everything up. And he was Sheikh of the Hanabila of his time, rahimahullah ta'ala, and I had the blessing of studying with him in his home in Riyadh, as well as doing tutelage for fatwa and research under him at Al-Rajhi Bank. So Ibn Uthaymeen studied with Ibn Aqil, got the basics down, came back to Sheikh Abdurrahman ibn Sa'di, and became his main student until he passed. And then he studied with Sheikh Abdulaziz ibn Baz, rahimahullah ta'ala, as well. And he has over 55 publications in his name. Now, what's the significance of a Sharh al-Mumta'? If we said al-Ruhaybani kind of gathered everything that had been said up to his time, and the Fatawa of Ibn Ibrahim kind of extends that for us to that time period, because questions are coming from all over the world about things, and they're being answered according to the madhab, then a Sharh al-Mumta' represents one of the fully original and extensive explanations of Hanbali fiqh after al-Ruhaybani, where the author, he's not just simply commenting on previous works, but he incorporates issues that were unaddressed, and he analyzes some of the previous conclusions. And so he analyzes some of them according to context, and he analyzes some of them according to the tarjih in the madhab. As there's more than one opinion in the madhab, he'll state why one opinion was more prevalent than the other. So it is a very important book to have and to study. And there's a number of prints. This one from Dar ibn al-Jawzi, is pretty good. I have another one. It's from some Egyptian print house. I don't recall what it's called, but it's you can find these on the Sheikh's website as well. So it's pretty good. So that's kind of where we are now, right? We went all the way up to 2001, right, with studying the madhab. And you will find amongst the scholars of the madhab, they will kind of ebb and flow in their interactions with other scholars of other madhahib and the areas of the world that they are, and kind of where they take things from. And we'll see that when we talk about what's authoritative and who's an authority. So for example, the later scholars of the Hanabila, like Ibn Uthaymeen, Ibn Baz, they were very much affected by fiqh al-hadith and the works of al-Hafidh ibn Hajar and al-Nawawi. And the generation before them were not. If you go to the earliest years, you'll find like Abu Ya'la is affected by like the Hanafi works, whereas others like Ibn Hamid are not. And so everybody is kind of swimming in the ocean of knowledge, and at times kind of holding onto the side of a boat, or sometimes swimming on their own. But they're all trying to fulfill the same goal, and that is to help you understand what Allah and His Messenger want from you. Which is, those of you who have attended the usul classes in the past, is the definition of al-hukm al-shar'i. What does Allah and His Messenger want from me in this instance? So again, going through these things, if we get focused on personas, if we get focused on ideological debates, if we get focused on historical issues, we can many times lose sight of the greater goal behind the idea of the books of fiqh, and that is at-tafaqquh. That is the idea of gaining understanding in our faith and then putting it into practice and doing something with it. So fiqh is not here for us to fight about, but it's here as an implement for us to learn. And that's it for tonight, everyone. My apologies for the audio issues. I think I figured out what the issue was. But regardless, Jazakallah khairan for your patience and for listening. And if you have any other questions, I'll take a couple of questions. Otherwise, it's 10:37, so we'll sign off. This is a good question. If many of the authorities of the madhab in recent times inclined towards the ikhtiyarat of Shaykh al-Islam, what prevented this from becoming the new mu'tamid of our era? I think what prevented it is that it's many times the ikhtiyarat of Shaykh al-Islam are simply previously spoken awjuh in the madhab. And so there was no need to really declare them as mu'tamad. And then secondly, many of those issues were not issues that necessarily were related to, well, I shouldn't say that, because a lot of them were related to mu'amalat and things like that. But I would gather that because the areas of qada were very much tied to things like the opinions of al-Buhuti, and al-Buhuti had already incorporated the opinions of Ibn Taymiyyah into many of his works, where applicable. There's this overinflated sense of like غلبة Ibn Taymiyyah على المذهب, right? There's no doubt that he had an immense effect on the madhab. But as I said before, many of the things that he stated, he was simply restating things that were already there in the madhab. He was simply restating them with greater strength, and then sometimes with little known to maybe better articulated adilla or ta'lilat. And so that's part of it. Uwais, Barakallahu feek. Thank you for joining. All right, everybody. Jazakallahu khairan. See you all tomorrow night, inshaAllah ta'ala. We're going to continue with this, and I'll see you all tomorrow night at 9:30 Central. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.